there's the two aspects of sleep, the non-REM sleep and the REM sleep. Why are each of those phases important when we sleep?
Yeah, it's a good question. So normally it's kind of divided into deep sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep, I think. And people these days, they often track their sleep with those apps with, is it Fitbit or a Oura Ring or something like that. And I think that's often how it categorizes them into those three categories. But I'm happy to categorize them the way you said, because you're highlighting REM sleep, which is the crucial one. So deep sleep especially is where we are doing the stuff that I said, but especially more physically. And so physically it affects everything. It affects the hormones, it affects the central nervous system, it affects the brain, but it's more of a, cells are being broken down, they're being recycled, they're being replicated, genes, organs are going through their processes of detoxification and clearance, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The REM sleep is more about, it's less about hardware and more about software, if that is a useful analogy. So rather than the physical rejuvenation, it's the psychological, mental stroke emotional rejuvenation that's going on. And so this is often referred to as dreaming sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement, for anyone who we haven't clarified that for. And that's because they found that people who are like rapidly blinking while they're asleep, that correlates with dreaming. And so in terms of the brain waves, that's especially the alpha brain wave. So the deep sleep is a delta brain wave. The theta is more like the light sleep. And then the alpha is the REM sleep. And so the REM sleep is where we are doing what I mentioned earlier, that learning from, processing, and then deciding what to commit to memory of previous experience. Now, there is some talk as well. It's not only about previous experience, it's also maybe about future experience. And so with dreams, you also have a creative aspect to them, which is significant. And this is perhaps why some people have experiences of what used to be called prophetic dreams, right? It happened to me in a dream, and then it eventually happened. Maybe it's because the dream magically made it happen, or maybe it's simply that by creating a template for it, your whole system then knew to move towards that experience and make that experience happen. I guess it's hard to prove that one way or the other, but most of the mainstream scientific establishment would say there's no such thing as magic powers, so then it must be just not necessarily a coincidence, but because you're having that experience, so you have more of an expectation of it happening, and so therefore you're more likely to be able to make it happen. There's this idea as well of people who rehearse things a lot beforehand in their mind are much more likely to successfully make that happen in the real world. So obviously you can rehearse that in your mind during the day, which would be daydreaming, but doing it at night would be, actual REM sleep dreaming. But anyway, so I'm getting more into the speculative area. Back to the processing of past experience. So that, from a mainstream scientific point of view, is the main point of that. And so it's like working through those experiences, and often it's more on the mammalian level. It's more on the feeling and even the reptile brain, the extinctual level. That's why dreams often don't make sense from a rational point of view, but they often can if you just look at the emotions and the feelings behind them. And so what your brain is, or your whole system is doing there, is sorting through these experiences, deciding what it can learn, and deciding what is worth remembering and what is not, and taking the stuff that is worth remembering and taking it from short-term memory and putting it into long-term memory. And so again, if you don't get enough REM sleep, this is often where memory is affected, because we have so much going on. I think there's a tiny percentage of people who have that photographic memory where they can literally like rewind and see everything that happened to them for a period of time, but that's extremely rare. I certainly don't have that, and I have what's generally considered to be a top 1% memory according to tests, and I'm still nowhere near that. So that's incredibly rare. So for the rest of us, definitely including me, we don't remember everything. And so we have to decide what we're going to remember. And that doesn't happen consciously. Like we talked about in the memory episode, like when there's a lot of adrenaline pumping through you during a particular experience, that often is a signal that this is an important experience, this is worth remembering. But other than that, the brain, and unfortunately, if that's the only signal that we have because we don't get enough REM sleep, then we will tend to our memories will just be filled with lots of fearful, anxious, stressful, traumatic experiences because that's the only clue that our brain has. But obviously, we are able to function better than that. Not everyone is in that state of just reacting to negativity, of course. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the civilization and the people that we have in the world. And so there must be another aspect to it. And this is it. The brain can actually process and go, okay, this is important. This is better. And it has that ability to prioritize. Now, here's the important thing about REM sleep versus the other types, deep sleep and light sleep. When you first start, your brain goes through these rhythms of 90 to 120 minutes. And then you actually wake up. You don't necessarily remember, and we'll talk later probably about that, waking up and stuff like that, but you kind of wake up and then you go back into it. Ideally, you don't remember that. But if you have one of those sleep tracker things, it'll show you that, you'll see that. And so during the first one or two of those, it's going to be mainly deep sleep and light sleep and not much REM sleep. Why? Because the survival of the physical organism is more important than the learning from experience, right? If it has to choose. The more of those 90 to 120 minute blocks you have, the higher the percentage of REM to the other types of sleep. At which point, between say 8 and 10 hours of sleep, so that last block, it might be 80+% of REM sleep. Whereas that first 120 minute block, it might be less than 20% of REM sleep. So what this means in practical terms for you non-mathematicians out there is that the difference between 6 and 7 and 8 hours sleep, let's say 6 and 8 hours sleep, may not seem that huge, and it actually doesn't have a huge impact on deep sleep, but it has a huge impact on REM sleep. So if you have 2 hours less sleep, 6 instead of 8, you might have 40, 50, 60% less REM sleep, depending on, individual variation. And so this is where what I perceive a lot of time as people who chronically lack sleep. Yes, it can manifest physically, but it often manifests before that mentally and emotionally, because the thing that they're really lacking and missing out on is not the physical rejuvenation, it's the psychological rejuvenation. And so this is often where people think that they're fine when they don't have enough sleep, because usually they use stimulants or stress to give them the energy to still function and all the stuff that I said, is still possible beforehand. And then they don't get ill, they don't necessarily have health issues. And they're like, I'm great, I do great on 5 or 6 hours sleep. And they don't realize, because there is an interesting thing about the brain that it's not very good at measuring its own performance, so the brain is like monitoring every other organ and every other system in the body, but it's hard for it to see itself by definition. So often, this you can often see in terms of when you actually relate to people who are to some degree delusional, right? There's all kinds of aspects that's been studied a lot, like cognitive dissonance. When someone is delusional, pointing out that they are delusional to them, no matter how gently, tactfully, and compassionately, is often completely ineffective, right? Because first of all, and I think sleep is a big part of that. First of all, if they're not getting enough sleep, then their ability to rationally think things through. So I said a lack of rationality. One of the most important things that the rational mind does, which again, more the prefrontal cortex, is to be able to work out what is and is not true. And secondarily, prefrontal cortex is required to even care what is and is not true. So the prefrontal cortex is the only part that cares. The mammalian part only cares about the tribe, about the group, what they think. They will happily go along if the majority is in a certain direction. If a person is primarily coming from that and the prefrontal cortex is not fully energized, they're much more likely to just go along with the group. And then the person who's really struggling and is mainly coming from that hindbrain, all they care about is surviving and reproducing. And they do not care about the tribe, and they do not care about what's true, So, and there are other reasons for that. There's genetic reasons why people might have proclivity to be more in one area of the brain than the other. I'm not saying it's only about sleep, and there's a conditioning aspect to it, and there's other aspects of it. But all things being equal, even someone who's really committed to caring about truth and what's real and what's right and all the rest of it, consistent lack of sleep will make it not only harder and harder to see what's actually true and real, it will make it harder and harder to even care what's true and real. So yeah, this is another reason why it's really super important to get enough sleep and to get that REM sleep so that then the prefrontal cortex is able to function properly.
Yeah, so it's definitely both are extremely valuable and necessary. So what you've made is a great distinction between survival of the organism is what is put first on the priority list. It doesn't mean that it's that you forego the latter half of sleep, because that also has a vital aspect. I know it's something we've been discussing with me and memory, as we were talking about earlier. So, hopefully getting those longer sleep cycles in will help attain that more memory capability.
Yes, and it's not the only thing. I have to say, toxicity is another thing that can impact memory, and I've noticed my memory has not been as good the last 3 years since I dealt with that toxicity thing, which I shared in previous videos. So I'm not saying it's the be-all and end-all only thing, but I think it is the most common thing that affects that memory and cognition issue. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Rejuvenate podcast. If you want to watch the full episode that came from, just click on the link above. Or if you just want to watch our latest video, then click the link below. And make sure that you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you.